Anna, is Armand joining or no? Or is he with you?
He's on the screen.
Yep, he
Okay,
just popped on.
good, great.
All right. Good afternoon. It's 4:05. We're going to start the meeting of the steering committee for Harbor Study. I'm going to turn it over to the consultant team and let them get going.
Thanks, Steve. I just shared my screen. Hopefully everyone sees it okay.
Yep, it looks good.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. Thanks so much for joining us today. Really happy to have you join for this second Harbor Steering Committee meeting. I hope everyone had a great long weekend. So I am joined by my colleague Alix from Indigo River and Anna and Armand from HRNA, who's our partner in this endeavor. Today we'll just be updating you on our progress since the first steering committee was held in February. So since that first meeting, just wanted to give you a quick run of what we've been up to. We hosted our first stakeholder interview series. So that was Harbor users as well as some agency representatives. We got some good feedback from them. Some of you are a part of that. And then in April, we completed our draft of baseline conditions and opportunities. We'll be presenting a high-level presentation of that today. And currently, we've been conducting some focus groups of Harbor businesses and users to obtain further feedback. We're doing this during May and June. Next up, we're doing the street end study, mooring study, and producing our Harbor recommendations report. And we really want to thank you for your help thus far. And now I will pass it to the HRNA team.
Thank you very much, Annie. My name is Armand. I'm a director at HRNA. I'm here with my colleague Anna. We're sitting side by side, so we'll switch over to her in a second. And what we're going to present for our portion of the existing conditions analysis, which we're presenting to you today, is demographic conditions, an industry analysis, and also some findings on recreation uses. And before we get into that, this is a reminder from like the last steering committee on what we mean by the harbor area. And it includes the 14 census block groups that are denoted in dark blue in this map. We have, in the next page, we will zoom into them. But this is important to highlight here. So just so you understand the geographic boundaries of the area that we will be presenting results on. And for the demographic portion of the analysis, we are comparing this harbor area with the formal boundaries of City of Norwalk, as well as the MSA. City of Norwalk is denoted here in light blue, and then the MSA, the Bridgewater Stamford Norwalk Danbury MSA, denoted in gray. Next slide, please. And this is a zoom in to the harbor area. And an important point to note for our industry analysis is that you will see here many landmarks, many attractions, many businesses that are critical in the harbor area, but some of them are operating within water-dependent economic activity, and some would be operating in what we would be defining as non-water dependent economic activity. So you will see here some names like, for example, the Sono collection, which might not be considered as a water dependent economic activity, but they are still within the harbor area. So their activities are captured in our analysis. And as we will be presenting you the results, you will be seeing that like how economic activity is divided between water dependent and non-water dependent uses. So this, along with the study area, was something that we want to level set before we get into the analysis findings. And with that, I'm handing it over to my colleague Anna to present to you about the demographic analysis and the industry analysis, and then I'll take it over again for recreation. Thank you.
Hi, sorry, we just making sure our volumes are correct. So I'm gonna talk to you about our demographics analysis. We looked at, kind of a key set of metrics that you might be familiar with when you think about demographics. That includes population, households, household type, age, race, ethnicity, income, and education level. Here on this slide, it's a little text heavy. We want to just kind of summarize some of the key takeaways of what we saw. And so what we found is that, both population and households are growing faster in the harbor area than when you compare them both to the city of Norwalk and the region, which is that MSA, the kind of the largest geography on that first slide that Armand showed. And so it's been a 20% increase in households over a 10-year period for the harbor area, compared with 5% for the city and only 1% for the MSA. We also wanted to note that the harbor area has a larger share relative to those other geographies of what we know as non-family households, which are, might be kind of people living alone or people living with roommates, versus family households, which are, folks who are married or people who have children. And so we think that might be one of the drivers of the increase in population and households. And then the second major takeaway is that harbor area households incomes are increasing faster than again at the city and the regional level, but they are lower, about 10,000 on average lower than the city of Norwalk and $15,000 lower than the region. And so if you want to just go to the next slide. This kind of visualizes some of the things I was just talking about, really showing growth both for population and households being much greater in the harbor area than in Norwalk and the region. And also kind of interesting to note is that the average household size for the harbor area in 2023 is slightly lower, again, kind of related to that larger share of non-family households versus family households. Anything to add, Emma?
No.
Great. Awesome. So for the industry analysis, this is kind of an existing conditions analysis where we're looking at the great picture of industry makeup in the harbor area and the city. As Armand mentioned, when he distinguished water dependent and non-water dependent uses, we're doing kind of a deeper dive into what those trends in businesses look like now. And some of you grateful to say that you participated in some of the focus groups we're doing where we're talking about that. If you actually just want to skip 2 more slides, I'm going to go to some more of the visual slides to talk about these takeaways. So at a high level, this is the current makeup of harbor area jobs. What you're seeing is that the roughly like 17,000 jobs that the most common industries represented are healthcare and social assistance jobs, as well as education jobs. I also want to note that social assistance jobs include things like organizations, nonprofits that serve individuals and families, dentist's office, home healthcare services, and obviously elementary and secondary schools. So, those top two industries are constituting about 30% or about 5,000 jobs. We also noted that around 30% of total jobs in the harbor area are blue collar jobs. So this includes things like construction, utilities, manufacturing, wholesale trade, transportation, and warehousing. Again, we think that's linked to some of the more industrial activities near the harbor. You could go to the next slide, please. This is an interesting kind of visualization of who works in the harbor versus who lives in the harbor. And so, this is focusing, I just want to note, on non-self-employed folks. So around the 15,000 workers in the harbor area, only about 1,000 both work in the harbor area and live in the harbor area. Whereas around 3,000 live in Norwalk outside of the harbor area, and another almost 3,000, around 2,700, live in places like Stamford or Bridgeport. And what you're seeing overall is that around 14,000 people are commuting into the harbor area for jobs there, and 8,000 people are commuting out. What I also just want to flag about that is that obviously more people are commuting in than out, which is kind of emphasizing that the harbor area is a job hub, connected to all those kinds of places on the map that Armand was showing, whether that's water dependent or not, and that distinguishes it from the city overall, in which actually more people are commuting out than in. And so we just want to, I think, a really key comparison in terms of understanding the industry and economy of the harbor area. Could go to the next slide. This slide is kind of overviewing a 10-year change in jobs across the key industries. And what you're seeing, kind of the top level finding that you're kind of seeing when you look at the far right and you see all that red, is that a lot of the kind of the city of Norwalk overall is seeing a decrease in jobs, about a 10% loss. And that only accommodation and food services and real estate, as well as constructions, are seeing increases. So yeah, that's a loss of about 10% between 2013 and 2022. The MSA also saw a shrunk, so the region shrunk by about 4%. And you're only seeing an increase in limited industries. We think this is really interesting when you contrast it to the next slide, which is going to show the harbor area 10-year jobs change, where, you know, there are some decreases in some industries, but you're actually seeing overall an increase in jobs. The harbor area grew by about 6%, instead of, again, seeing a loss. And, you know, that's really being driven by administration and waste management, accommodation and food services. And again, this is kind of one of our key takeaways, is just contrasting the trends you're seeing in harbor area jobs versus the city. And if you could go to the next slide. So to kind of wrap up this analysis of industry in the harbor area and the city, we started to look at, you know, of the industries in the harbor area and the city, which of those includes water dependent jobs. You may recall from our meeting in February, we talked about specific NAICS codes that represent water dependent jobs, so that we could flag when we were doing this analysis which industries contain those. So we used that definition that we discussed to complete this initial analysis, which is basically showing that of the industries in the harbor area, 17% include those with water dependent jobs versus only 13% for the city of Norwalk. Like I've alluded to before, in task 2, which is what we're working on now, we're doing a kind of a more of a deep dive business related analysis to really understand the water dependent businesses that operate in the harbor and really rely on the harbor and kind of really are truly water dependent. And so I think we'll have deeper findings from that to report out, which really kind of paints the ecosystem of the harbor. And I think we've just got one more slide in this section. This is a graph that's kind of,
I think there's a question.
apologies, Jason.
Yeah, thanks. And where are you pulling these data from? Is this self-reporting based on surveys? Is this your own forensic research?
No, this is a national source that combines census and I know by its acronym better. It's business reported and census reported data in terms of where people work and where people live.
And Bureau of Labor Statistics is that?
Right.
Yeah.
That's the overarching.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. Correct. Did that answer your question, Jason?
Yep.
Thanks. This slide kind of demonstrates for some of those NAICS 4-digit categories that are water dependent, again, kind of going back to that definition that we discussed at the last meeting, showing both kind of where the number of jobs based on this data that's represented in the harbor area, and then the average annual earnings at the MSA level, compared with the living wage needed to live in the city of Norwalk. So you'll see that purple dotted line estimates that for, you know, a household of approximately 2 adults and 1 child in the MSA, you would need around $65,000 as a household. And what you're, you know, kind of unsurprisingly seeing is that some of the industries that kind of drive jobs in a harbor area, specifically, you know, food and beverage or tourism related, fall below that living wage mark, which is something we've seen when we looked at other harbor areas before.
Mhm.
Yeah, and if you can go to the next slide.
Now, I am going to take over. Thank you, Anna, for recreation. So you've seen a lot of findings from the industry analysis, and we are happy to discuss them. There is a lot to take in on that front. You know, the harbor area being a regional job driver, while Norwalk is losing jobs. The fact that water dependent jobs making up a small, possibly smaller than expected portion of total jobs and total economic activity, 17 to 13%. It was an interesting finding there, as well as that observation around most of the water dependent jobs are low paying. That's again a common issue across the Northeast in communities that have blue economy and water dependent economic activity because of the over reliance on service jobs. So those are some important observations that we saw on the industry side. And recreation was another separate category that we looked at. And for this one, we're using a data source that looks at aggregated and anonymized cell phone data that tracks people's movements geographically, how much time they spent in a location, etc. Yeah, so everybody is being tracked, and there are data sources out there that use them for purposes like this. So we use them to understand where different, what kind of movement and traffic, user traffic happens in different landmarks across the city. So when we did that analysis, we saw that demographic trends across those different recreation categories within Norwalk are generally more aligned with the MSA than the harbor area or the city in terms of demographics. And what do we mean by that? As we will see in the next couple of slides, the user groups, age-wise, 35 to 64 age group comprises the largest share across our analyzed destinations. And roughly 1/5 of the users are children. So that is an observation that you can see elsewhere across the Northeast as well. But when we look at the racial distribution, there is a larger share of white visitors from like roughly high 50s, almost 60% across these different recreation destinations. And this trend does not really match the city of Norwalk or the harbor area. It matches more the MSA population. And that, when combined with our observation in number 2, certain regional anchors for recreation in Norwalk, they are regional drivers of visitation. So as we will see, the regional population visitation makes up a larger percentage of these different locations. And the last observation that we saw was visitation actually peaked over the past 3 years around summer 2023, showing growth from 2022, but not as high as 2024. So this is something that we wanted to check with you and see if that resonates with your experience, because this was something that we saw in the data. Next slide, please. And to just get into what I just described a little bit more visually, this shows the demographic characteristics of the visitors, education level at the left, age in the middle, and then race and ethnicity to the right. As I was saying, more roughly 1/5 is children, and then the 35 to 64% makes up the largest share. And then almost 1/5 is over 64 years. And then race and ethnicity. This distribution is more closely aligned with the MSA, as I was saying, than the city of Norwalk. So next slide, please. This shows that, so what we did here, and Jason, I'm curious also by your perspective, because Maritime Aquarium was one of the major anchors that we looked at for this analysis. We looked at regional anchors like the Sona Collection, the Maritime Aquarium, the Washington Street Corridor. We looked at a combination of the marinas and the combination of the parks and beaches, and I'm happy to go through the list, the full list of locations that we combined in those categories. We saw that a very large portion of visitation for Sona Collection and Maritime Aquarium are actually from outside of Norwalk, over 80% for both of them. Sona Collection, almost 90%. But also for amenities or anchors or regional destinations within Norwalk that we would expect maybe like more City of Norwalk driven visitation. They're also still quite regional, around 70%. Washington Street corridor, the marinas, the parks and beaches, 69 and 67% out of Norwalk visitation. So curious again if this is aligned with what you would be expecting, roughly 1/3 of the visitation being from Norwalk residents, and how that could be tied to a possible goal to increase the City of Norwalk resident visitation for these recreation anchors. And one last slide in this section. Is there a question? No, okay, never mind. We're done actually with this section. So if there are any questions, we can take them now or later. If not, Annie, over to you.
I mean, I'll just and jump in to say, you asked a lot of questions, including a couple for the aquarium. I'm happy to entertain them now if you want. You could finish the deck. We could talk later, whatever you guys prefer.
I leave it to our Indigo River folks.
Maybe I'll quickly go through and we can field all questions at the end. Is that okay?
Perfect.
Okay. So Indigo River looked at existing conditions for the environment and natural resources. We looked at a slightly different study area that was more encompassing the in-water portion of the harbor. We looked specifically at what's shown on this slide in the bullets. I'll be presenting on just a couple of these today. You also see in crosshatch here, Connecticut's coastal boundaries, which is just a regulatory boundary that's important to keep in mind. During the next phase, we'll probably be identifying some strategic zones and sub areas of the harbor to better zoom in and provide recommendations. One facet we looked at in our mapping was navigational opportunities and hardships. So a part of our existing conditions analysis was just trying to understand any navigational challenges that occur in the harbor. For this map, we looked at how, or for this slide, we looked at how often dredging was conducted in the Federal Navigation Channel, potential hazards that vessels might experience, tidal swings, geomorphic shoaling, and strong currents are some things that mariners might experience. Through our outreach, we also understand that the mooring field in the harbor is underutilized and there's limited anchorage for mid to large size vessels. So we're looking into this further as part of our mooring plan effort. But this was kind of the baseline map we're looking at for navigation in the harbor. Another really important part of what we're looking at is, of course, natural resources. And we found that the harbor has a multitude of protected areas. These are under federal, state, municipal jurisdiction. On the map here, we've shown how these harbor protected areas intersect with defined areas of natural diversity, including critical habitat, important bird areas. So here we're just trying to better understand how to balance public access, vessel traffic, protection of Norwalk's significant coastal natural resources. We really understand are starting to fully understand how special this place is, and we want to really respect its natural resources as we proceed to the recommendation stage. Another important component of our mapping efforts and our baseline conditions analysis was looking into shellfish. We mapped managed shellfish beds according to publicly accessible data. These include natural, recreational, state managed, and town managed beds. We understand from our outreach, our focus groups and our interview that declining commercial waterfront activity, including the decline of the oyster industry, presents an opportunity for expanded uses in the harbor, and that there is interest in attracting additional commercial uses to the harbor. So I think this history is just really important to acknowledge and understand as we further dive into our recommendations. And then I'll pass to Alix for public access.
Hi, thanks, Annie. Yeah, so jumping in quickly to just discuss our findings so far on public access, which is also a very important component of the strategic harbor management plan. The map you're seeing reflects publicly accessible sites based on both available data and input from our initial interview series. So, for example, through our recent stakeholder meeting, we gained some additional insights. For example, we know that a number of street and access points in East Norwalk, like 1st, 2nd, and 5th streets, are currently missing from official records, and sites like Fitch points, which were previously accessible, have been gated off. We also learned that informal access through marinas, oyster farms, waterfront restaurants plays a meaningful role in public use of the harbor, even if they're not formally designated. So we've been continuing to gather data on existing access and where that can be expanded. Some docks, piers, and access points are in poor condition with aging infrastructure or overgrown vegetation, like at Woodward Avenue Park, which limits usability. So we're establishing that better signage and rehabilitation are needed to improve accessibility. Also, just a note that we'll be conducting a dedicated study of street end access points this summer, and we'll incorporate those findings into a series of updated maps and recommendations. And also note about sea level rise. So climate change and sea level rise are also critical issues for the Norwalk Harbor. Here we've mapped areas of mean high water inundation across our study area to identify both existing and future risks. And stakeholders that we have been in touch with noted that several low-lying coastal access points and also public resources, such as the Norwalk Island campsites, are already affected by storm damage and deferred maintenance. There's also concern about wetland degradation and shoreline erosion, again, particularly in areas like Woodward Avenue Park, where Phragmites overgrowth just limits ecological and public function. And so looking ahead, we'll be studying how vulnerable coastal infrastructure, including parks, public facilities, and informal access points may be impacted by continued sea level rise. Back to you, Annie.
Yep, and just one more slide here. This kind of chaotic map shows recreational boat traffic. So this is an important element of our analysis. These vessel traffic routes, they include water trails, recreational boater routes, fishing and charter boats, recreational fishing activity. We've heard anecdotally that recreational boat traffic has increased since COVID. So we wanted to map this out and kind of seek to balance all the somewhat competing vessel traffic uses in the harbor. We've also heard that marinas in Norwalk are commercial businesses, but primarily serve recreational vessels. So our efforts moving forward and our recommendations will seek to distinguish between commercial marina operations and the number of recreational vessels supported in order to better make recommendations. And so just quickly going through next steps, we're continuing our focus groups and conducting additional interviews through May and June. HRNA is working on an industrial economic analysis findings and recommendations report. We'll be moving on to the mooring plan and the street end study during this summer. And then moving ultimately to the harbor management strategy best practices and recommendations, which we hope to issue in September. So more stakeholder outreach coming during the summer, and then moving more on to the reporting of our findings. So I think that was it. I think we just have an appendix if needed, but I'll open the floor for questions and feedback.
Well, I'll just jump in and say it's a great presentation. Thanks. A ton of information here. I'd love to see the deck if you can send it around just to be able to
Definitely.
take a closer look at some of the facts you've got in there.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm just really curious on the boat tracks on there. How is that data obtained? That's interesting.
This might be a question for our GIS specialist, Alix, if you.
I
would
can jump in.
know.
I can jump in, yes. This is data that was compiled by CT Deep in 2021. So it's a snapshot from 1 year of boating activity that was compiled by them and that we are representing here.
In 2021,
Yes.
my guess is it's significant. I mean, that was still, more or less the middle of the pandemic. My guess is well, it's hard to say, right? Folks who had boats were getting out far more frequently to escape. It'd be interesting. It was such an anomalous year. I'd be curious where it is now.
I think they are actually working on an updated site right now. It has not yet been published, but hopefully we'll have access to that data soon.
If you leave your AIS device on your boat while you're just moseying around, that all is recorded. And what you're seeing here is the aggregation of all that information, which is kind of fascinating to see. I have a question about Alan Kibbe. I'm the chair of the Norwalk Harbor Management Commission, about what our goals are in looking at the moorings in Norwalk. That's been an item on our hit list. I'm just asking for a little bit more information about what you're looking to do, or what information we're gathering.
Shay, are you still on and able to speak to that? Looks like he's muted. He is leading that effort, so I was hoping he'd be able to speak to it. I know, Alix, you've been looking into a lot of mapping for that.
Our baseline is looking at the NOAA data, so things that include, oh, hello? So looking at things like water depth, existing obstacles in the harbor, even including things like wind patterns. But yes, again, I think Shay will be able to speak to that a little bit better.
Yeah, and it also would include access points, which connects to the
Yes.
street end project, as well as how to get to your boat, things like that.
Yep.
Absolutely.
The understanding has to be that a lot of the mooring holders don't own waterfront property, so they have to have a place to park their car and leave a rowboat or something like that, so they can get to their vessel. That's the point of that. But I'm just curious. The Harbor Management Commission manages the moorings, and we've seen a decline, as you stated, over the period. And I think I think Norwalk is a terrific destination, both for transients and for people who want to keep their boat here. So I think it's important for, in its own way, for the economic well-being of the community.
Yes.
But as you've noted, the trick is getting to your mooring.
Well, that's absolutely the point. That's just why the street end is figures into this, and also the location of places to keep a vessel.
Yeah.
Small vessel.
A question that we've discussed before, and I've raised and others have discussed. Let me do the easy one first. Is there any consideration in this review for location services for emergency vessels, police, fire, and the like? I know they've moved around. I know the police are over there at Gary's location, but has there been any consideration made with regard to having a central facility for emergency vehicles as part of this plan?
Emergency access, definitely a component of what we're looking at. So this is really good feedback.
I'm not really speaking to access. I'm talking about actual physical infrastructure in terms of the city contributing or building. I don't mean to have a move from Gary's lovely place, but in terms of having a facility that would handle maybe a central location for, you know, it's a little different. You know, you don't necessarily put the fire department next to the police department on land for obvious reasons. But this is a little bit unique because they're also work in cooperation and they respond to typically the same emergency for a various reason, but they would both most likely be there. So I didn't know if that was anywhere in this plan, any consideration was given to it, but you might want to
Yeah.
put that in the equation someplace. I know there's no reps from police or fire here, but it would be worthwhile having a conversation with them at some point.
Okay.
I want to, that point aside, I want to go back to something we've discussed before. I think I've raised before. It's the context of this committee, commission, whatever you want to call it, and the recommendations that may come out from us and the final product that will come out from the consulting group. Is it in the context of existing zoning regulations? Will you essentially, and I'm sorry, Stephen, will you ignore current zoning and make a recommendation with regards to best use? Well, how does that fit in? Because, you know, we all know, those of us that have put up buildings, and I have put up a few, I mean, the whole world is driven by zoning. I mean, what can I build on my piece of property? There was a question, I'm not sure if I
Yeah.
made sense, but you know, I think you know where I'm going with this.
I would say the majority of our recommendations would be in the context of existing zoning recommendations. We may, you know, if the recommendations potentially would require a zoning change, include this, but we know what a hurdle that is. So
well,
it would definitely have to be like explicitly said that that would be a hurdle to this recommendation if it is included.
Don't misinterpret my questions. And I'm not asking for zoning changes, suggesting they should or should not occur. But again, you know, as I said, you have a piece of property, you can only do so much
Yeah.
until you get through zoning, and then you go ahead and
And our study will take into account the previous studies, like the industrial water use plan that UTIL did, which again had its own zoning level analysis, and we are taking all that into account as well in our recommendations.
I have a question too. Just in the slide we're looking at, there's very little shown upriver past the I-95 bridge, and that's a very interesting area as well, because the industry, other than Divine Brothers, there really isn't any active industry up there, and it tends to be, aside from the Public Works Department and the sewage treatment plant, all it seems to be is a lot of interest in gentrification and apartment building up there, and less continuation of commercial activity. So I'm just curious, are you looking at that part of the harbor as well?
We are. I think this was a facet of just where the data set was located, but our study area does extend upriver and include those portions. I think it was the
Thank you.
data set, right, Alix?
Yeah, exactly. But we are,
Right.
as Andy said, we are looking upriver as well.
I am mystified by this chart of the boating traffic. That's just caught me. If that is AIS data, that's just a very small amount of boats that have AIS. That would record those tracks, and of the overall traffic, that would be maybe 2 or 3% of the boats in the harbor that would have AIS active and in the harbor. Anyhow, I just was really curious about that. But I think I want to jump around a little bit to Jerry Tony's suggestion of the police and the fire. That's been a problem on this river forever, and we have this new park going, and the police are my tenant, so I don't want to get rid of them. I love them being there, but Manresa would be the ultimate place for the police and the fire. And it's beyond the speed zone. It's not issues with them responding and having to go slow out of the river for emergencies. And they could still go up the river as needed. But yeah, just something to think about. That would be like, you know, they're going to put a marina in there, or the plan is to put some sort of boating activity into there. That would be the ideal home. Just something to think about. And then the last thing I was going to say is we mentioned rising seawater. Is there any documentation of rising seawater? That's just a question. It hasn't. I've been here a long time, and I'm hitting the same rocks I hit when I was a kid.
There is documentation of rising, yes, to answer the question, there is, this is a combination of observed sea level rise, even if it's not visible to the eye, and projected. So this represents, you know, an exaggerated just snapshot of sea level rise, but we are taking it into consideration.
I mean, it's a political football. I don't mean to argue it. I've seen more storm events, but I've not seen a change in sea level in 65 years. Certainly storm events have increased, and
Right.
I think
So I live, this is Shay from Indigo. I live on the waterfront in Amityville, and I have my own actual recording tide gauge at my house.
Yeah.
And over the past decade I've been at my house, it's 8 inches to be exact above. So there, you know, in certain instances, when you have a normal consideration for what we're looking at, in other words, it's not wavy, you don't have a lot of wake traffic, you don't have a very heavy wind driven thing, then it does show a still water level that has risen in the past decade. And that's, I think the fear is that it's been most recently in the last decade, whereas it might have been extremely small for the last 65 years up into 5 years ago even. So that's why we are tracking it, but we're looking at 8 inches.
Wow.
The scientists have us trying to look at 29 inches, 32 inches, projecting out to 2080 to 2100, which we understand isn't necessarily the focus of this analysis. But one of the reasons why we think the plan is important is because water dependent uses should also be the most resilient uses for your waterfront so that it could be adaptable to sea level rise. And we think that building the waterfront properly now and expanding it into those agencies or into those employment areas, or just building so that it can accommodate a sea level rise, is part of what we're focused on here as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shay. Now that you're able to unmute, did you also want to just add anything about the moorings plan per Alan's question?
Yeah, sorry about that. Two things. Yeah, for the AIS stuff, it is AIS data, and there's a lot more vessels in there than you would expect. And we have their courses and destination points and where they come from, where their home ports are, the type of vessel they actually are. So it was a fairly low percentage of recreational vessels, which we found, that were located there. So locals probably don't turn on their AIS. Of course, everybody knows there's a lot of sailboat races there. I've raced there 20, 30 times. And I know my AIS has on that recording as well. So you're right, there are a lot of trips, there are a lot of individual data points, but the number of vessels does give us a pattern, and the type of vessels, which will be in the report. The other part about the moorings is that gives us the same data, those same vessels coming in and out, whether they're transient. You know, moorings for deep draft sailboats is important because I couldn't get into all reports of the harbor when I was racing. You know, moorings for commercial boats, is it an area that they can access other things? So, and there isn't a plan for those either. We see that there is recreational mooring. It's not as used as much as it could be. I think that's a function of both the accessibility. You have one point in the harbor with which to get on a boat and get ferried out there, or you have your own dinghy to get out there. So I think access is part of it from all the shores. I think part of it should be a commercial venture, because you're going to need to be able to provide waterfront access with motorboats and things like that. And we're also looking at how we can deal with moorings offshore in the islands where you could get, if we could connect a network of moorings from the islands to the mainland, connect those same moorings to private residences or connect those moorings to larger commercial marinas where then we could generate potentially some way to get out to the outer islands, even if you don't have your own boat. Or you could moor out there with your own boat and have a way to get back and forth out there. So the moorings is tough. Everybody knows you've got a minimum depth, and we're going to try to advance some additional areas for deep draft, shallow draft, and potentially for, you know, commercial transient. Not saying a water taxi, but something that gets people further access to the mooring fields and things like that.
Have you spoken to or brought in anybody from the Manresa Island Corp? The Manresa Public Park Corps, I think is the official name. And in particular, it'd be Jess Vanashek.
We haven't. They're on the stakeholder list. Annie, right?
Yeah, we're very familiar with that. I don't think they've participated yet in our focus groups, but you said a name of a specific person?
Yeah, Jessica,
Okay.
for short, Vanashek.
Well, if she hasn't responded and we've reached out to them, then if there's someone on the panel here that could help us out with a direct
Yeah.
contact, that's part of the reason why we're begging and pleading here.
Yeah, she knows she actually this study was like her kind of idea before she left the city, so we can reach out to her easy enough.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think you know, while certainly we can help, I think it's incumbent on you as the consultant to make sure that however it happens, however hard it may be, that you get her involvement. Because everything that you're talking about, Shay, in terms of access to the outer islands is very much in their frame of mind with respect to Manresa. And how that expands beyond Manresa and their specific plans for the public park there to other islands and other destinations is an open question. So, you know, I don't have more details than that. Steve?
No, that's our job.
Yeah, and I think all of us actually know Jess reasonably well. I mean, the Maritime Aquarium's technically a partner to the Manresa effort, so I'm happy to reach out to Jess, Steve. I'd say you volunteered quicker than me. So you're welcome to it. But I can certainly follow up and you know, join you in the effort.
And for everybody's transparency, HRNA is currently working with Manresa Island Park. So we're working with Jessica, and just wanted to mention that for transparency.
Well, so, you know, again, you can encourage her to participate in this effort, but you know, they're a big player, and they will be in the future plans of the harbor, and yeah.
I just wanted to add to that. I think that the study of where the police and fire boats ultimately goes up is a separate effort from this. I know we had talked about that over the last couple of years, and knowing they had to find probably a different home, permanent home at some point. I'll follow up with maybe with the administration to see where that actually sits, but I don't believe that initially we were looking at that, but I don't think that got wrapped back into this. If there are no other questions, we do have public comments. I think unless do you guys have anything else, Annie, or are you guys wrapped up?
No, unless anyone else has any questions or feedback. And again, we can share this presentation as well.
Please.
Yeah, and we'll post it on our page if you could forward it us.
Okay.
Get it posted.
Great.
Yeah, and we do oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, you had a number of stats relating specifically to the Maritime Aquarium. You had questions earlier. I'm happy to go into them if you want. I don't need to if you don't want.
Steve, where are you going to post those so we can find them?
We'll post them to the study page. It'll probably be a couple of days, but we'll get them posted there.
Thanks.
I'll forward it out to you guys separately, but it'll get posted there.
So, we adjourn in a couple minutes. If you go, I think your first question was actually on the data from 2023, which was one or two slides ahead of this one.
One more, yeah, that's the one. And the third point, if you can scroll down a little bit.
Right. So, actually, that's right. The governor had a very ambitious program, CT Summer at the Museum, where he opened the door to all the cultural institutions and attractions in the state to state residents 18 and under free of charge. So that were the institutions up in Mystic, the Aquarium, the Seaport, Beardsley, Science Center up in Hartford, us. I think there are a number of smaller outfits that participated. Those were record-breaking years for all of us. So that's what you're seeing. They were high in 2024 as well. Actually, so last year was the first year that the program did not take place in 3 years. It went in 2021, 2022, 2023. I would have thought you'd see higher numbers in 2022 than 2023. I could check our own attendance numbers. But yeah, those are very special years with a significant boost from the governor's basically subsidizing public participation and admission in all of our facilities. So so I could happily spend more time with you on that if you want, separately, and have my staff involved to compare your numbers with ours. The next set of questions that you had were on.
We go one slide or two slides down. One more. Yes, this one.
Yeah. So this is interesting. This is far higher than what we have in our own records. We are usually, and we looked at these a couple times. We looked at them in the context of the economic impact analysis that ESI did through the Redevelopment Agency. And I don't know if that's a report with which you guys are familiar. It's on our website. Be worth looking at, I think, specific to the Maritime Aquarium, but it'll give you an awful lot of good data to look at and compare. They came out with a figure that was closer to 50-50 out of town with Norwalk. And our own figures, our own data had been about 60-40, 60% out of town, which is largely Westchester, but it does include all 50 states. And 40% in-state, largely Norwalk. So if you're looking at this as Norwalk residents versus out of Norwalk, it might actually be consistent. We were looking at out-of-state versus in-state.
Yeah.
That's a good observation. So the data that we look at, it is based on cell phone data, but it's a sampled data. So it will be theoretically a large enough sample that is representative of the entire population, but it will not be as accurate as the data that you would have access to on your visitation. But that point around in-state out versus out of state, that could be the explanation, actually.
Yeah, so maybe, but I'm happy to spend some time with you guys separately with the team here and just see if we can corroborate and compare the best. And I think Soto Collection generally has a slightly higher out of town, out of state visitation than we do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm while you're on the numbers, Jason, I'm quite surprised by the last graph of the parks and beaches. 67% from out of town.
Yeah, right.
I don't know about that, but
Yeah, we can.
Easy to question the numbers than do the hard work as you've done. But I just, as somebody who's been around for a few years, they're not accessible to out of towners. So
yeah. So I mean, that's exactly why we're asking, like, if this is like aligned with your understanding, and this includes. I can just rattle off the parks and beaches that we looked at: Veterans Memorial Park, Oyster Shell Park, Mill Hill Historic Park, Cow Pasture Beach, and the Shady Beach Park. Those are the 5 you're looking at in the last column. But yeah, we were surprised by these two.
Those are the
Sorry.
big ones. That my guess is if you were to put
Yeah.
some of the smaller parks, the percent of
Yeah.
Norwalk visitation
maybe, yeah.
shoot up significantly. Calf Pasture Beach will definitely get a broader crowd.
I think to some extent, sorry, I think to some extent, Norwalk in a way extends beyond its own bounds. So we have a number of bedroom communities around us, New Canaan, Wilton, Westport, Darien, that if those folks are looking to go for shopping or cultural activity or whatever, they tend to come to Norwalk. And so it's interesting how you kind of include those areas and how you draw the boundary. Because if you draw it at the city line, there's not a whole lot to do in New Canaan, but you come out. I hope I'm not offending anybody from New Canaan, but if you want entertainment and things like that, for a lot of restaurants and a lot of things going on in entertainment and shopping, you go to Norwalk, and that's just the way it is. But our bedroom suburbs certainly come to Norwalk a great deal, and we see that with the parks and beaches because those are landlocked. The nearby ones are landlocked communities. So if they want to swim in something other than a pool, you really have to come to the beach in Norwalk or Darien or Westport.
That's a really great insight. And actually in the data, we saw that the largest visitation besides Norwalk was from Westport and Wilton, and some again from Darien. That was relatively smaller than those two. So yes, I think if we include them, this increases by 10 to 15%, if I'm remembering correctly. We only looked at the legal boundaries of the city of Norwalk.
Right.
Yes.
And we also, if anybody from the public wanted to ask just to participate for a couple of minutes, we just use your raise your hand function. We can allow you to speak for a minute before we wrap up. Okay. Anybody else with any questions? Yes, no? Going once, going twice? Okay. All right, so we'll send out the slides and we'll do some follow-up. I have a bunch of emails I'll follow up with in terms of, and I think we can also check with Parks and Rec on some of the data that they have. I can reach out to the Sono collection. I believe they probably have data on visitation. I know they track that. I think they track it through their parking. That's probably how they do it. So we can get that data too, to just kind of fact check and supplement when needed, and we'll get that out. Okay, anything else, Annie?
No, thanks, Steve. Thanks everyone for your feedback. We look forward to continuing this process.
Great.
Yeah, thank
Thanks.
you all. Good
Thank
luck.
you, everybody. Thank you. Have a good day.
You.
Good night.